Today, we're going to talk about a story that's pretty wild. It's a story of incredible economic success that, almost overnight, turned into a complete and utter meltdown. This is the tale of how some of the world's fastest-growing economies, they called them the Asian tigers, suddenly and spectacularly imploded. And that really is the big question here, isn't it? How does something that looks like an economic miracle, we're talking unprecedented growth, booming markets, just flip and become a global nightmare? Let's get into it. All right, so first, we gotta set the stage. In the years before 1997, East Asia was basically the envy of the entire world. These economies were just on fire, growing at this incredible pace, and it seemed like they had a foolproof recipe for success. There were two key ingredients in this recipe. First, you had just massive amounts of foreign money. We're talking billions and billions of dollars pouring in from investors who were chasing big profits. And second, a lot of these countries pegged their currencies to the US dollar. That combination, it acted like absolute jet fuel for their economies. So this pegged exchange rate thing is super important to understand. It's basically a government saying, hey, our currency is going to be worth a fixed amount of US dollars, no matter what. For those international investors, this made everything seem incredibly predictable and safe. It created this illusion of total stability. But you know how it goes. When something looks too good to be true, it usually is. Beneath all that booming growth, there were some serious cracks forming in the foundation. A massive bubble was building, and it was just about ready to pop. All that foreign cash that was flooding into the banks, it wasn't just sitting in a vault. Oh no. It was getting loaned out like crazy, mostly to people pouring money into real estate and the local stock markets. And that is where the trouble really started. All this easy money was just feeding a giant speculative bubble. Property prices, stock prices, they shot up to levels that were completely unsustainable. The whole thing was becoming a giant house of cards. So when you peel back the layers, you see what was really going on. You had weak financial rules, so banks were making super risky loans without much oversight. They were lending out way too much money. And on top of that bubble, countries were spending more on foreign goods than they were earning from their own exports, relying on all that incoming cash to keep things afloat. And that brings us to the collapse. Once those weaknesses were exposed, the entire system came crashing down. It was like a set of dominoes, one falling right after the other with a chain reaction that went around the world. So what was the trigger? What was the spark that lit the fuse? It all came down to one thing: confidence. The second those foreign investors got nervous, they started pulling their money out fast. The very same money that built the boom was now fleeing for the exits, and that sudden outflow was absolutely devastating. And the panic spread like wildfire. It all kicked off in Thailand in July of '97. By the fall, it had jumped to Malaysia and Indonesia. Before the year was even over, an economic powerhouse like South Korea needed a massive international bailout. The shockwaves from this thing were eventually felt as far away as Russia and Brazil. It was truly global. The result was just catastrophic. As all that money fled, countries couldn't hold on to those currency pegs anymore. I mean, just look at what happened to Indonesia's currency, the rupiah. Its value completely cratered. And since so many businesses had debts in US dollars, this collapse made it pretty much impossible for them to pay anyone back. And the consequences for real people? They were brutal. Banks went out of business, the entire economies shrank, plunging countries into deep recessions. Unemployment shot through the roof, and businesses were going bankrupt left and right. It was absolute economic carnage. So after a crash that big, what comes next? Well, a long and painful recovery. It meant huge international interventions and some really fundamental changes to how these economies were run. It was literally a process of rebuilding from the rubble. And we can't forget the human side of all this. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. The incredible economic pain led directly to social unrest, protests, and major political instability in a bunch of countries. This is where the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, stepped in. Their approach was basically a three-part plan. First, give out massive bailout loans to stop the bleeding. But, and this is a big but, they also imposed really strict conditions. Things like forcing governments to cut spending and make painful economic reforms. The idea was to restore investor confidence, but these conditions were, let's just say, highly controversial. So, what's the lasting legacy of all of this chaos? Well, in the end, many of these countries made huge changes.
They beefed up their financial regulations, improved transparency, and put in new rules to better control the flow of money in and out of their borders, all to prevent another crisis like this from ever happening again.
And that leaves us with one final big question. Today, our global financial system is more connected, more intertwined than it has ever been. Money can zip across the planet in a millisecond. So after looking back at this meltdown from 1997, what do you think? Are we truly better prepared for the next one?